Good morning. Hemshech Ayin Beis, the review and of the conclusion of the Hemshech. And we are on page 1380. Okay. Discussing primarily Talmud. After we've reviewed what is Mikra and Mishna, all part of Torah, the Torah that illuminates. Remember the pasuk Ner Mitzvah Torah, that's where we have Torah. And the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer and the Alter Rebbe's Maimer elaborate, especially the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer, what Torah is. You may recall from that Maimer the concepts that he brought here in the early part of this, when he started talking about this on page 1350, 1352, that it's a Atzmi Torah. And there he actually discussed also Torah Shebiksav and Torah Shebal Peh, similar to the ideas that we're learning here, even though the Rebbe Rashab has not yet returned to that pasuk Ner Mitzvah B'Torah. That will be in a while from now. But the ideas, some of the ideas, and that will be literally on page 1463, and we're on 1380. So we're talking about a good 80 pages from now. However, the concept of in Torah itself that you have the Torah as is given to us from above, and then there's the effort that we invest and employ when we immerse ourselves, like he's calling here the Talmud Amoraim, who struggle with and exert themselves to try to understand the details, is in the Torah itself. It's a Malmata Lamaila in the Malmata Lamata of Torah. So he discussed there as well the Chodesh, the new energy that is created through that. Like we're going to be learning here, like we've learned a few pages back, what Bina adds to Chochma, like a new birthing that comes from the feminine side, which is the mother, Bina Yased Nitna Be'isha, that is not there from the father alone, from Chochma alone. So Chochma is the kernel and the seed, and the birthing can't happen without that seed, obviously. Chochma is also the clarity, but it's through the process of Bina, the struggle, and the in-depth immersion to comprehend the idea, that is what the Amoraim do in Talmud, is what creates a new birthing, is essentially an important theme in the latter part of that Maimer, in the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer, Mika Hashem Elokeinu, just to make the connection. How it applies back to our discussion, Ner Mitzvah and Torah and Ner Hashem Nishmasadim, that we'll learn later. But that aspect of Torah having that power, which is what we're learning now, the Avodah in learning Torah and understanding it, like he calls it, like we learned yesterday, that it's the Hasogas HaEmes that comes from Hasogas HaEmes. Before, by the Mishna, he said it's much deeper. It's not just Hasogas HaEmes. There he said it's Riyas HaEmes. The third line of the paragraph that begins on page 1379, he said that in Gemara and Talmud, Gemara, you get what is Pilpul Dinas. He has Hasogas HaEmes. Loikamaya Mishna Shi Riyas HaEmes, because Mishna has that clarity that's passed on from teacher to student. So yes, the Tanoim, the sages, definitely applied themselves and they studied it and they learned it, but the main clarity came from what they heard. Whereas by the Amoraim, the clarity is coming because they don't understand it clearly like the Tanoim, so it has to come through their exertion and their effort. So he calls that Hasogas HaEmes. And this Hasogas HaEmes is what we learned yesterday. This is what Talmud is. And that's what the Omer Razal say, that's like Machshakim Heshivanu Zu Talmud Bavli. You've placed me in darkness. You've settled me in darkness. That's Talmud Shalmi. And like the pasuk continues, like he brings after Kemese Elam, forever like that, Kemese Elam, like those that are lifeless, the opposite of life. So the Shalah asks the question, how could you say on Torah, Talmud Bavli, Torah is Torah and Torah is Chaim, or he called Chayenu? How could you refer to Machshakim, darkness, and the opposite of life on Torah? So he explained, it's not on Torah, it's on the Seichel HaOdam, Shenechshach V'Nismayit, the generational so-called degradation has caused them not to be able to have that clarity. So Talmud Bavli is referring to addressing a generation where you don't have that clarity. So they're sitting in darkness. And the Talmud Bavli comes to bring that clarity even in darkness, as he explains from the Shalah. And that is a result of the Chet Eitzadas, because the Chet Eitzadas was what brought that darkness into the world. Like he says, were it not for the Chet Eitzadas, they could have understood it all from Torah Shebiksav directly. Lo yitzrichim the Torah Shebapeh, and they wouldn't need Torah Shebapeh. Other Marishan before the Chet had that clarity and crystallization of Chochma law. But because of the Chet, the was nostalgic, it was concealed, like he explains, and that's why they need a pirush on the Mishnah and a pirush on the pirush as the generations go. And death was introduced into the world, the opposite of life, and that's why you need now to struggle in Torah Shebapeh to find that clarity. He adds another kvetche, another point, that we actually counter the death by us, so to speak, giving our lives, ready to die for Torah. And that in turn brings the life of Torah into our lives. And that's Machshaki Meshivani Kamesel. Okay. Then he continues the new paragraph that we learned, that this isn't just referring to the Gavra, because based on this, the Shalah's answer, it's not the Torah that's dark, Torah's Torah and Torah Chayenu. It's the person, it's the generation. But then he says, Omnam, Gama Talmud hu b'chinas cheshach. Because the Talmud enters there, the Talmud's process is also through darkness. So it's not that the Torah has lost its light, but the process of finding light through Torah Shebapeh, especially Talmud Bavli, is through struggling, like he says, Ribi Kush is through the concealment. Because the whole point is that they don't. It's not like they just open up a Gemara and you get right away the clarity. It's because it's not clear. That's why they had to go through this whole pilpul and deliberation and discussion, and Gam Ribi Hakushis with many questions. This is all his lamas v'estadim till you reveal the emes, and that's the hasagas emes. So he just adds one more point here. In other words, so this darkness can also machshaka meshivani. The Gemara does say zu Talmud Bavli. So it's not just Talmud Bavli is illuminating the darkness. It itself also is a process of going through darkness to light. Okay. Which, of course, as I explained yesterday, makes the Torah, therefore, relate to us in our situation. Mikra Mishnah, even though we learn it as well, but its clarity is sometimes eludes us. That's why we need the Gemara. And with this, he explains the Gemara in Baba Metzia. Baba Metzia compares Mikra, Mishnah, Talmud, and says that Mikra is a midah v'lei midah. Mishnah, Esek b'Mikra midah v'lei midah. Mishnah is midah makablim schar. Actually, I think Yitzchak posted the Gemara, so we can look inside the exact full lashon as well. Okay. Let's look at it. A second. Yeah, the Gemara in Bava Metzia. Yeah, midah ve'eina midah. They translated here a virtue, but not a complete virtue. Mishna is a virtue, and they receive word for it. Study. Midah mekabim alaschar. Talmud ein lo midah gdei mizu. There's no virtue greater than that. They touch virtue, midah as virtue. Midah can also mean midas, as we've been learning, midas of Chochma. In other words, it's already channeled into a structure. Yeah, I know the end of the Gemara seems to contradict. It says, "Lo'elam hariratz leMishnah yesim in a Talmud." You should pursue Mishnah more than the Talmud. The Rebbe Rashab does not address that statement. So it's a good question that we can ask after we finish. So why does it say then that we should pursue Mishnah more than Talmud? If Gemara has that, if Talmud has this quality. But that can be explained in different ways. That can be explained because of the clarity of Mishnah. But I don't want to go into that since he's not quoting that. So that's the Gemara. So the Gemara is telling us, therefore, that that's the power of Talmud. Even though Talmud is going through darkness, through questions, through a lack of. The whole Talmud came, like we learned before, because of the Chet Eitzadas and because of the concealments. So he explains that Rebbe Rashab, the Pashut reason for that, what the Gemara says, why the greatest virtue is Talmud. He says, I'll be Pashut who, because Nismayat HaLevavis, like we learned before. The hearts and minds have been diminished. Here he uses the word Levavis. It means in general, it's a lower spiritual state, a lower cognizant state. So from the volume of Mishna, the why is Talmud so great is because Talmud clarifies the din lamitose v'chol hapratim shabai. So that's a very balabatish pashut reason why the Gemara is saying that Talmud is nothing greater than Talmud, because Talmud clarifies everything. But even a situation where Nismayat HaLevavis, where we don't have the initial clarity. Amnam, the Rebbe Rashab does not suffice for that. He says, Ayin Beis, much more than that. And we began learning this. I'll go over it again. The Talmud actually, because based on this explanation, you'd say the Talmud is good, is special for whom? For those that don't have clarity. For those that do have clarity, in Mishna, but the Gemara says, Ein lecha midah gdela mizu, and everybody. It doesn't say just for those that don't have the clarity. So how do you explain that? So he's going to say now that the truth is the Gemara is telling us something more. That learning Gemara has a virtue that actually adds even to the Chochma, clear Chochma, the clarity of Chochma in Mishna and in Mikra. So let's read it inside again, even though I began, but we'll read it and explain it. Now, this goes back to the explanation why I brought earlier about Bina verifying, confirming, affirming, corroborating, all the different expressions we used, the truth of Chochm. In Talmud, it confirms, or that it solidifies. I don't want to say solidify. It's even more than misamis is even more than confirms. It's like verifies in that absolute way. It's like establishes that this is the truth of the emes of Chochma. The kasheba pitam b'seichel hanim izgala emes l'koil, like we learned earlier, that when it comes in seichel, in Chochma there's the clarity because you have the clarity. In Bina, it came through a process of questions and answers, like I described, discovery of challenging the statement, and then coming to the emes. So it's mizgala emes al pitam b'seichel l'koil to everyone, but b'chinas nigla umeir oid yesur b'chinas agila de Chochma. Even more than the Gilui de Chochma. Like he said 3 points earlier when he spoke about Chochma and Bina. One, that it makes it revealed to everybody. This way, only the odd person who's a Chochem and has that clarity accepts the truth of it or knows the truth of it. Now with Bina, it brings it to everyone. Number two, it makes it certain. He said David HaMuchrich. He doesn't spell that out here, but he referred to that earlier. And the third thing, it removes kol sigub selis. It removes questions and challenges. That's what an appeal does. That's why you have shtar sheyatza lav irur, a contract that was challenged or appealed, and you uphold it, is stronger than the contract initially. Because now you can't appeal it anymore. Because now it's gone through that rigorous process. Before it was appealed, you could say maybe the contract had a mistake in it. Maybe there was something wrong. Maybe there was a forgery, whatever it may be. But now that we've gone through the rigorous process of confirming it and upholding it, then it gets a certain certainty, like a stamp of approval, like we learned earlier, chosem emes, like literally a stamp of approval, a seal of approval. Then now it has that emes that has now basically permeated everyone and everywhere. And that's its addition to the Gilui of Chochma. And like we learned earlier about on page 1375, 5 pages back. So now he's going to explain this more detail. So we see from this that Ein lecha midah gdela mizu in Gemara is not just because it brings clarity to a place where there's no clarity, but it's because that process actually adds an element of truth that you would not have a Chochma alone. In other words, if we didn't have Bina, there would be something lacking. So we learned this earlier, but let's see how he explains it here, and we can compare it back to page 1375. So I'm going to continue reading from Va'inyanhu, around around 9 lines from the bottom, 8 lines from the bottom, page 1380. The pages can be found at ayinbeis.com. So here we go. Va'inyanhu. Here's the Inyan in this. This power that the Chochma Talmud, so we're talking now the Amoraim, the sages of the Talmud, the generations after the Tanoim. This power that they had, levader ulalaven, to clarify and crystallize, kol dini hatera sheba Mishna, all the laws of the Torah that are in the Mishnah, ulahitzi, and to extract from them, ulagales eira emes, and to reveal the light of truth. Gam b'bchinas helam eira Chochma, also in a state where there's the helam eira Chochma, so that's an achievement. They did something. They were able to extract and draw out and clarify, and crystallize from the Mishnah, even when there's a helam eira Chochma, when it was not initially revealed. That's an achievement. He says that power, where do they have that power from? Why don't you say, listen, they're subject to the concealment, and you know what? They're not Tanoim, and that's that. The student is weaker than the teacher, and who says that the student can get to that clarity? But they did get to the clarity. That's what the Talmud does. So he's basically saying, where's that power come from? He says now, so he's adding here a key thing that he said in the beginning, I'll point out in a moment, but now he's going to elaborate. Humepenei shehigiu, because these Amoraim, these sages, reached ba'atzmus ha-Chochma. They reached into the core essence of the Chochma itself. Ubesharsha umekeda, and in its root and in its source, shalamayla b'chinas Gilui eira Chochma. That's higher than the revelation of the eira Chochma. Sheba Mishna, which we find in the Mishnah. So now he's saying, because this light can pierce the darkness, you have to say it's reaching deeper into the source of the light. So Mishnah obviously is a high level, because the Mishnah has that clarity. And we learned that length, relatively, ish mipi ish, that Rabbeinu HaKadosh received directly, generation to generation, all the way back to Moshe, all the way back to Pi HaGvura, Moshe Sinai, from Hashem. So that's a very powerful Gilui. But that's a Gilui on levels where they have that clarity. What happens if that now you reach a place where you don't have the clarity because of Golus or the Nismayat HaLevavis or the other factors that contributed to the concealment? So here, the only way to find clarity and bring it even into a darker place, he says you go back to the etzem of they were able to reach into the very core of Chochma, and it's Sheirish Shemakir. Now, he said this in a one line earlier, just to point out that this was already stated, but at the time, you may recall, I pointed out that he didn't explain it. He just made a statement like that. Because initially you'd think Talmud Bavli is lower than Mishnah. And it is lower, because you're only getting an explanation of the Mishnah. And the Mishnah has that, what he called the illumination of Chochmei law within Chochmei Tata. And yet, on page, when he began to speak about Talmud, on page, let me give you the exact page, I want to just refer to that expression. On page 1372, he said, when he said Talmud is in Bria, middle of the page, he says, why is it in Bria? Because there the ha'ara is only ha'ara, not etzem ha'er. Because Bria is cheshech. But then the yeshlema, the ha'ara zu, hilamayla, mipchinas etzem ha'er shebiyitzira. And then he says, this ha'ara in Talmud, in Bria, is higher than the etzem ha'er of Yitzira. So why is it a state of darkness? Because it's only a reflection. So as I pointed out then, I said, we'll understand that later. And that's what the later is now. So I'll go back to that later after we finish learning. I just wanted to connect what we're learning here with what he said back then. So it is sound paradoxical. Is it higher? Is it lower? Is it Bria? And Mishnah is Yitzira? So we're going to learn that Mishnah is more Gilui and Talmud is more Etzem. So they do get that clarity, but they get it in a state after there's a concealment. Through that concealment, they reach a deeper level. So the key thing to keep in mind is like the example I always give with Baal Shem Tov. When that farm boy on Rosh Hashanah said kukariku, and he was able to pierce the heavens more than the prayers of the tzaddikim and the students and colleagues of the Baal Shem Tov, that is not an endorsement to advocate illiteracy. Because at the end of the day, a scholar is a scholar and a prayer is a prayer. However, it's to show that there are certain things, sometimes the deep darkness can lead someone to a core place that Gilui would not lead them to. So we're soon going to understand the quality of each, because you really need both. You need the Gilui of Mishna, because if not, you could say, you know what, why do we need Mishna in the first place? Why didn't we just jump from Mikra to Talmud? Because you want to have the clarity. But then in the situation when that clarity is concealed, there's a process which we were given, a power called the Koyach HaBina of Teresh Sheba'al Peh, that through our effort and exertion, we can dig deeper and find within the etzem of Chochma a light that can illuminate even when there's darkness. This doesn't mean that Golus is higher than Geula. It means there's a depth that Golus reaches, similar to what we learned about the Helam Ha'atzmi when we talked about Mata L'mayla and Aveda, the distress that comes when you don't have hope. Min HaMeitzar, you can reach a deeper place in Netzer. So we're going to talk about this more as we go along. I just wanted to spell it out so it shouldn't be that confusing when we look at both sides of this. So that's what he says here.
Can you take a question?
I would suggest. Let me just see something. The reason I'm hesitating about questions now is because I want to avoid processing here, and rather we should be in a state of absorbing. Because I think once we do that, we'll answer a lot of questions. So I have nothing against questions, but I think he's going to now explain this in more depth, what this means, this process. But I'm fine. If you want to ask a question, go for it.
It's actually a very fun, basic Chassidus question. I feel stupid almost asking it, but I'm going to ask anyways.
There's no stupid questions. There are no stupid questions, as I always point out.
Okay, thank you. You keep saying that that Mishna is a Gilui because it comes from p.1380 all the way from Sinai, so it is a divine revelation. At the same time, but now we're talking about Gemara, and we're saying that in a sense it's a ha'ara, but at the same time it's a greater Gilui, so it's both. And at the end of the day, it is what it is. So I mean, why don't we call it a Gilui? I mean, it is a Gilui. It's just it takes more yigia, but at the end of the day, it says it's even greater Gilui. So I'm just trying to it's like a paradox. You said on the one hand, it's a greater Gilui.
I just addressed this paradox. I just gave a whole explanation. Yeah. I came to explain this paradox, and I said that we're going to understand it well when we learn it all.
Right, but I'm talking about the lashon. I'm talking about just the lashon alone. Just
what about the farm boy? Is that a Gilui or
yeah? Well,
it's not called a Gilui. That's called the etzem, not called a Gilui, because he's not expressing any. He doesn't have any Giluim as far as intelligence or knowledge or clarity in Torah. It just has a very sincere place that pierces the very core essence of heaven. But that's not called Gilui. So yes, after the fact, the Talmud brings revelation in darkness, but the reason it was able to do so because it reached a place that Mishna does not have to reach. Because Mishna has that clarity at the outset. And I compared it to Baal Tshuva like a tzaddik. So Baal Tshuva has the quality that he came through darkness and did reach, became a Baal Tshuva, and he's higher than the level of a tzaddik, but you can't take away the Giluyim of a tzaddik. So we're going to learn. Both are necessary. They're both absolutely necessary. At the end of the day, the Gemara the Talmud is an explanation of the Mishnah. It's not an independent study. The whole Talmud is analyzing the Mishnah, is drawing out of the Mishnah more details, more depth, and so on.
Thank you.
Yeah. When a student asks questions of a teacher, the teacher has a clarity on his own. But when he's challenged and questions are asked, even by someone who is lesser knowledge than the teacher, so the Gilui is less, but it draws out something that will actually add a lot more, increase. It will increase greater Gilui as well. But the process is one that comes through the darkness. We're going to learn this more detail. The next 5 pages, 4 or 5 pages, is going to discuss at length, relatively, the difference between Mishnah and Talmud. Actually, more than 5 pages. You're actually going to talk about it, I guess, more than 10 pages even. The next 10 pages is going to be a lot about this all. I'll just add one more thing. Chassidus, you'll find, the Rebbe Sichos says a lot of this, that there's always the asusa de la'ela, which means an inspiration from above. There's asusa l'tata, inspiration from within. We generate from bottom up. Now, each one has something the other doesn't have. When it's from above, it's a higher, more firepower, basically, because it's coming from above. When it comes from our effort, it's only commensurate to how much we can do. On the other hand, qualitatively, there's something Asusa L'Tata has, which is it's integrated. Mine. It came from me, much more pneumistic. And the end is you want to have both. You want to have the Mailamata and the Mamat Lamayla. That's the context in general of the interface in Ayin Beis and Mamat Lamayla and Mailamata.
Beautiful. Wow.
Now we're learning in Torah itself. Tefillah and Torah is a general category of Mamat Lamayla and Mailamata. Now we're learning in Torah itself, in Torah itself, there's the initial and the that comes through the darkness. Now, again, if you look at the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer that we learned at length, Mishka Hashem Elokeinu, he actually talks about it very explicitly. Now, it's interesting, the Rebbe Rashab does not quote here from there, but there's no question there's a parallel, especially knowing that a big part of Ayin Beis here is based on that, but he doesn't quote that here. But if you look there, you could see how that can add understanding here, and what we're learning here could add to an understanding there. So the connection to Ner Mitzvah, as I said, we'll talk about later. But for now, these are these 2 points is what the key thing he's going to explain right now. Mishnah and Talmud.
Very helpful. Wow.
Okay.
Thank
so
you.
the Hine.
Yes.
From this point of view, I have a question. You just mentioned Asusa de la Tata, inspiration from above. And I have a long-term question. Does Hasidim has a set of rules how that would help to emerge in a studying of Torah? Does it? Do we? I know we used to say go to mikvah, pray before studying. Do we have such kind of set of rules that sharpen the mind in order to comprehend Torah better?
Of course. You go to Pirkei Avos, it says there are 48 midas, the 6th chapter, 48 different methods, he says there, how to acquire Torah. And there's all over. It's full of, in the Talmud and so many places, talks about methodologies that help a person sharpen their minds, help a person learn better, absorb better. There are many, many, absolutely.
It would be great to collect all of them in one place in order to study.
Well, I would just refer you to chapter 6 in the Ethics of the Fathers, Pirkei Avot. You have 48 there.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so now he says the hinin is barely ill. Because now it was explained earlier. We're talking about on page 1378. The Shis Sidre Mishnah, the 6 orders of the Mishnah, Shas, Shish Shdarim, remember we learned how does it move from Torah Shebiksav to Torah Shebal Peh, from Chochma Law to Chochma Tata and Malchus of Torah Shebal Peh through the Midas of Chochma. And since there's 6 Midas, that's why there's 6 orders and 60 tractates. Back 2 pages back, top of page 1378. So he says, so they originated Chochma law. This is Mikra Tersha B'Ksav. The midas of Chochma law, Chesed, Gvura, which channels, like we learned the different kavim, Isser, Veheter, Tuma, Tara. So it channels it through the 6 midas in Malchus. And that in turn manifests in Yitzira, the 6 midas of Zav Yitzira. So he says, midas of Chochma is already a Gilui. That's why the Mishnah is a form of Gilui. What is the Mishnah doing? As we learned, the Mishnah takes a din. Let's say, Kshatim leisa yodecha, uchsaftim amazuzas al beisecha v'sharecha. That's the pasuk, and the Mishnah will extract from it, will reveal the details into a full din. That's what the Tanoim did in the Mishnah. Yes, it's true that the next generations need further clarity. That's why we have Talmud. But the role of Mishnah we learned earlier was exactly that: midas of Chochma, taking the Chochma, the kernel, the seed, which is a nekuda in Teresh B'Ksav. It's just a nekuda. It's one verse. It just tells you the action. It tells you keep Shabbos. Zocher Eshem HaShabbos. Or Shomer Eshem HaShabbos, as we read this past Shabbos. Keep Shabbos. Protect Shabbos. Remember Shabbos. But what are the details? So there it actually says, that 6 days you should work, and Shabbos you should rest. But what does that mean? The Mishnah will spell out 39 melachas, the things you're not allowed to do, all the details. So the Mishnah is essentially a Gilui, taking from the kernel, the seed of Chochma, and turning it into something that is more revealed. Okay, do it. The midas is Gilui, something we've learned already a number of times, that the midas is a level of Gilui. He said that there, back on page 1378. He also said it when he began to talk about Mishnah, just like to connect everything. The bottom of page 1366. He also explained midas is shaychus al elmis. It's already, what is midas? What's the difference between seichel and midas? And especially chochma and midas. So we learned seichel is for yourself. You learn something, you don't need anyone. Midas means already a relationship. You may not have someone right now to be mashpiach chesed to, but the concept of chesed is already some hashpah. Same thing in Mishnah. The Mikra just tells you the facts. The Mishnah is already applying it to life. We need much more once the Seichel, the Chochma is concealed, just qualifying that regarding Talmud. But as far as Mishnah compared to, putting yourself in the shoes of Rabbeinu HaKadosh and the age, the generation of the Tanoim of Mishnah, it's a Gilui. The Midas and Bechin is Gilui. However, this Gilui is not hasagas emes like we learn in Talmud. Here, it's a Gilui with a clarity of visual. They actually had a vision. They were able to almost see it. Well, see it with their eye, the eye of the mind. Okay, I want to just see this parentheses. I know it can be a little distracting. I'll read it quickly. Yesed Shebachachma is one of the midas in Chachma. It's the 6th midah, actually. Who al derech moshel nekudas haskola Shebachachma shezeh b'chinas sichli shenasa mokel hasoga de bina. So, from Chachma to go into bina, you don't just jump. You need the midas of Chachma with Yesed Shebachachma, the last of the 6 midas. Is like a nekuda saskol, the nekuda of the seichel of Chochma, not just the resonating higher truth of Chochma, That's the sichli that becomes a mocker, a source for the comprehension of bina. So basically, it works like this: this chochma, the midas of chochma channel chochma into bina. So what you see from this is that in this level of Mishnah, you're having a level of Gilui. However, it's a Gilui that's very much linked directly to the clarity of Chochma. But it's already the midas of Chochma. Begam bezeh b'bchinas Chochma b'bchinas hanochas sichlis. So commission is barliel. Another element of clarity that is achieved there is the hanochas sichlis. The hanochas sichlis is like the resonating element. There's a leitzach that you feel, you sense the truth of it. It resonates. And the midas of Chochma, I'm assuming he means here higher than Yesod. The Yesod is the Nekuda and also the Anochas Sichlis. The midas is Shabo b'chinas Riyas Ayin HaSeichel. That has more than just a resonance, it's like a visualization, which is higher than the pure Seichel and Asaga because you're getting a certain visualization clarity. So even though it's already coming into midas, but it's the Gilui of Eira Chochma. So what we see from this is that Mishna is a form of Gilui in contrast to the Nekuda of Chochma alone. That's why it's Shishas Dorim, 6, corresponding to the 6 midas. But the core of Chochma, which he's not saying explicitly here, but that's like Mikra, is only a Nekuda. And that's like the verses of the written Torah. There's no Gilui there. Not there's no Gilui at all, but it means relatively Gilui as far as being able to draw out a halacha, ain't b'chinas Gilui klal. Well, who b'chinas ma de Chochma? There's the koyach ma, the koyach of Chochma, that's already as it's coming into Seichel, or at least into the clarity of Seichel. And there's ma de Chochma, shezel ma sheyesh b'Chochma b'chinas ayin de keser mamish. That's how Chochma still has something from the ayin of keser, like we learned from that awe, from that mystique. The thing that we recognize there's a truth greater than ourselves. So it's more than just a matter of understanding. Bina explains and understands. In Mikra, we learned you have a sense of the elikus of it, the sheer divine divinity in Torah. If you recall, he said that very clearly as well on page 1372. I just want to read the words. He says, because it's less seichel already, I don't want to use the word dilutes, but definitely diffuses and manifests the truth into a seichelic argument, into a logical argument. But that pure truth, that you just sense that something is true, you sense that you're in the presence of something beyond yourself, that is there in the ma and ayin of Chochma, which connects it to Keser. But that's Chochma as it faces Keser. We want Chochma as it faces Bina and is coming down into the midas of Chochma, into the into Malchus, into Yitzira, into Mishna. That's already a revealing it that we can appreciate it. So where is there more so-called the pure resonating emes is in the Nekuda of Chochma, but they're still in a state of Helam, not Gilui. So it's a state where Chochma is receiving from Ayin of Kesher Mamish. That's one way he explains it. Oi, Shehu Iskalus HaChochma B'chinas Mokar HaChochma. Another way is that it's the how Chochma is encompassed in the source of Chochma.
Is this
But then
the
he adds
idea
in
of how, is this
then
the
he
same
adds
thing
in the
as,
parentheses, 1 second, and then he adds in the parentheses, V'akol Echad. So, I discussed this at length when we learned it the first time, because here's where he goes down to the Pardes that talks about how superconsciousness enters into consciousness. It even became a series that Yitzchak Yu, I believe, sponsored, of the steps, the 6 steps of how we go from superconscious to the conscious, which he's going to discuss now.
the step?
So the
Just real quick,
distinction between these 2 levels is like this. So I'm not going to elaborate as I did back then. Like I said in the past, things that I discussed more at length, I'll rely on. You could always go back and hear the classes as I explained them almost 2 years ago when we first learned this. But I'll just say, for the purposes of, again, the broader context of what we're learning here, the interface, we're trying to understand the interface between the divine and existence, and Torah is a tremendous role playing that. It plays a tremendous role in that interface, Torah Eir. So on one hand, Torah is godly. On the other hand, Torah comes down in a logical system. We can read a pasuk, we can understand a Mishnah, and it's elaborated upon in the Talmud. So Mikra, Mishnah, Talmud, as I've discussed a number of times, are actually 3 levels of how godliness turns into consciousness. Because the pure Mikra is connected very much, like he's saying here, to the Ayin of Keser, which is really a state that's higher than Asoga, than comprehension. It's more a state of awe, of reverence, of mystique, of recognizing a truth greater than ourselves. Mishna is already an understanding. It's a Gilui. It's the midas of Chochma that are becoming the midas of Malchus, and ultimately Yitzira, and that's why you have the halachas of Mishna. We'll get to Talmud later. Talmud, of course, takes it into the level where there's much more darkness. But in the context of how Mishnah connects with Mikra, he's saying 2 things here. Either it's the Mikra. Either it's the Etzem, the Ma'av Chochma, that Chochma has the Ayin of Keser, or in a more subtle level, it's Chochma, conscious intelligence, and superconscious intelligence. So even though superconscious intelligence is in Keser, that's why it says Akol Echad. It's really all one. But when you break it down, it is 2 levels. Because in Keser itself, you have Chochma Shebe Keser, like Chochma Stima. In Chochma Stima itself, you have a lower level of Chochma Stima. He's going to discuss this soon. Chochma Stima is concealed Chochma. So there's Chochma Stima and Keser that relates to Chochma Gilui in Atzilus. And then there's levels of Ayin of Keser, which is much more the not, you don't even call it superconscious. You call it more the mystique, if you wish, or the resonating truth of a reality that's greater than yourself, the way I like to explain it. So subtly, it's 2 levels, even though generally it's Akol Echad, like he says. Why is it 1? Because they're both higher than the Hasoga of understanding. So in truth is, when you really break this down, there are many, many levels. And it can get quite complex. And it's going to get complex. The next section is a pretty complicated one. That's why I'm not going to go over it in detail as we did the first time around, because there's no need to do it twice. I'm just saying enough that's relevant to our discussion. Remember, our goal is to interface that right now he's talking about Mishnah, but even further, Talmud, that we should connect to that resonating truth of godliness in Torah. So on one hand, you need that purity. You need the pristine, like he's calling here the etzem, what he calls etzem ha-chochma. How the chochma is a state of helam and not a state of gilui. And then there's how it comes into a state of gilui, which is what Mishnah does. Now we're going to learn that Talmud, through the exertion of Talmud, we get to the etzem ha-chochma that's even deeper than the gilui of chochma. Whereas Mishnah is the gilui of chochma. Mishnah is the midas within chochma. Now, does this mean we get to the mikra, or we get even deeper than the root of mikra? That he's going to discuss later. That mikra itself has also a revealed state and an atzmizdika state. But just to put this into the context, if you recall, let's just go back. He said like this. He says that why does the Talmud verify and corroborate and establish a type of stamp of approval or seal of approval where it confirms the truth of Chochma? Is because the Amoraim, the sages, were able to reach through their effort, through the darkness, they were able to reach to the etzem of Chochma. I'm just reading his words here. So to explain what is the difference between the Gilui Chochma Sheba Mishna and the etzem that the sages of the Talmud reached, he's explaining this Nakuda, that there's the etzem and there's the Mishnah is the midas of Chochma. It's already coming out in a revealed way. So it's revealed. That is subject to be concealed. And indeed, after the generation of the Tanoim, after the Mishnah, it got concealed. But through their effort, as we're going to learn, they went back to so-called to the mouth of the well, back to the source code, so to speak, the etzem of Chochma, which is higher than the Gilui of Chochma. So that's what he's saying here right now in this whole context.
I wanted to ask if this goes back, way back.
One second. 1 minute here. What do you want to ask?
The Gilui front in Mishna, and then the Gilui that's this paradoxical Gilui in Gemara. Is this related to what we learned a long time back of the Haben Shebachachma and the Chochm Shebabina? That Mishnah is
I'd have to look it up. Not necessarily, but I have to look and see the language there. It may or may not. I'm not sure.
It's 1198. I'll send you the segment. Ayin Beis. I was trying to connect to way back, learning we did way back.
I would have to look that up. Yeah. Okay. I think I'm going to stop here. What I'm going to do now, the next class, I don't know if we're going to learn inside the next whole section, even though it's fascinating stuff and very relevant. But I'm thinking maybe I should just sum it up in brief, because it can become very dense and complex. And that's why when we learned it the first time, we went through it in very much detail. I remember I did quite a few classes just on this next section. So maybe I'll just sum it up in the context of what's relevant to us, and then go back to Mishnah Talmud, which is the end of the paragraph. Yeah. But briefly, as I just said, the key point to keep in mind is that the process of 2 points I want to make. Number one is that what we call seichel, intelligence, is just a rung. There's a rungs on the ladder. Everything is about divine revelation. We said it's not about intelligence as in logic and rationale. It's about experiencing a higher truth. Seichel, God blessed us with seichel, Chochma, Bina, Das, in order for us to be able to appreciate this higher truth. So seichel allows us that. If we were just bali midas, if we were just emotional, impulsive creatures, then our primary focus in life would be serving our own needs, our own impulsive and emotional subjective needs. Seichel allows us to travel to places that are beyond our subjectivity, beyond self-interest, basically. So it's a perfect keli to experience the divine. Now, when we learn Torah, especially Torah, because Torah is God's wisdom, you're getting a mix of these two things. Human intelligence, because Torah is Dibra Torah B'Lashon B'nei Adam. The Torah does speak in the language of man. The Torah does speak in the language of logic and rational thinking, like we said, Al-Pitam V'das. But in Mikra, the main illuminating element is the truth of God's words. It's God's word, the holy words of Torah. In Mishnah, it's starting to emerge into a structured system, not just starting. Shisha Sidri Mishnah, 6 orders of the Mishnah, brings this godliness into you can call it the mechanics, into a systemized system, into a system of living by these laws. That's what Mishnah does. So it's a Talmud is going to explain the Mishnah for those that don't have that clarity that the Mishnah has. So in the process, Mishnah is essentially a Gilui of the Ayin of Keser, or of the Mokra Chochma, the superconscious intelligence within Keser, as it becomes the root of Chochma Gluya in the Mikra, in Mishnah. So Mishnah is revealed Chochma. However, because of the darkness that resulted from the concealments, that causes the students to have to dig deeper and immerse themselves. And when they do that, they're going back to the root, in Keser, in the Etzem of the Chochma, to draw from there, and that's what allows them to pierce even the darkness. So in that sense, Talmud reaches deeper into the core. Mishna also gets it from there, obviously, but a Mishna was not necessary because they had it all clear. It was only necessary when it's dark, when it's not clear. Rabbeinu HaKodesh and his colleagues, they had clarity. I mean, anything they weren't clear about, they clarified, and they put it into the Mishna. So it's dafka when we go into a state of a lower state that compels us to have to dig deeper into the deeper resources of what he's calling etzem HaChochma, not just Gilui HaChochma. That's essentially what we're learning right now. And he's going to now go in the next section, he's going to go more detail of these levels of where Chochma meets that which is beyond Chochma. So Mishnah draws from there, but Talmud is ultimately going to access it in a more powerful way because it needs it in order to counter the darkness and illuminate even the darkness. So you look at the end of the paragraph, you'll see it says, "V'zeu ina Mishnah shebechinas Gilui era Chochma sheba bechinas Chochma bruda. V'atalmud shemavarer umalabenes haMishnah lohetziera emes l'idei pilpul akushes estiris, which is helam v'cheshach ulataretz." He says, "Zeu nimshach bechinas helam u'makar haChochma k'meishi b'mkedes shelamayla bechinas haGilui." So that's reaching into the helam of Chochma, which is a fascinating concept because you'd usually think that if the student is weaker and there's more darkness, basically you'd say, you know what, you can't give him so much revelation. So you have to diminish it. You have to spoon feed him in a very limited way because he doesn't get that clarity. This is common experience. You know, if you have a class and a brilliant teacher, the students that are on the highest level will appreciate it most. Students on a lower level are going to get less. That seems to make sense. But here, the interesting thing is that if they exert themselves and they work hard, it's the Helam itself is going to allow them into the very core and essence of the teacher's mind, and in that sense, draw from the Sheirish Makar Chochma. So it's not just about diminishment, it's actually in the lower levels, they can access higher levels because of the concealment, which makes sense if you think of it, like I said, with the concept of distress. When a person is desperate, when a person feels the real need, there's a whole new level of urgency that they're going to be more Meiser Nefesh to try to find the truth. So this doesn't mean that Balei Mishnah didn't have clarity. Obviously, they did. But they were not compelled to have to go to that place. Just like a tzaddik doesn't have to go dig deeper. He has the resources and he serves God. It's the Baal Tshuva who is thirsty, like he says in Tanya, from a parched Shamalach Nafshi, because he has not experienced godliness and he's developed a deep thirst and a void. That void compels him, and that pressure catapults him, you can say, propels him to a place that someone who is sated and is not thirsty would not necessarily reach. Now, as I said, we're going to learn about this a lot more, but here in this next part of this paragraph, he's going to discuss the dynamics and the mechanics, you can say, of how this works. Where is Chochma, how Chochma receives from Keser, Chochma Gluya, Etzem HaChochma. That's part of this discussion here. So I will go over it, but I think I'll do it probably more concise way, just simply, it'll be more more efficient and effective, because if we go into the nitty-gritty, it can really take us off. It can become very, it'll become a life of its own, which is fine. But I did that the first time around. Here I'm trying to focus more on the bigger picture. But we'll see from this how Torah serves indeed like an interface from the highest levels down to the lowest levels. Okay, I'm going to stop here. We're close to the top of page 1381. Any questions?
I just have a clarification that I got today from when you said the midas of Chochma. It just occurred to me that I've heard before that a man's malchus is his wife. So now I'm thinking, this whole time that I was thinking about the midas, chesed or Chochma all the way up to malchus, I thought it was shayach all 10 to the same world. But now, today, it occurs to me that the midos of Chochma, from Chochma all the way to Yesod, that's Chochma, and the malchus of that particular chain is actually the malchus of Bina, because Bina is receiving. Is this correct?
Well, in general speaking, Chochma and Bina are Abba v'Ima, so
Well,
male, female.
that's just the first example. I mean, it goes on to the next
And
world.
then and then in general, there's Zoh and Malchus, the Mashpia and Mekabel. Here we've been talking that Mishnah is Malchus, Masnisa, Malchusa, but in general, he was speaking about Torah in general being Mekabel of Malchus, that all three levels, Mikra, Mishnah, Talmud, is the Malchus of Atzilus that manifests in Bria, Yitzir, and Asiya. So I'm not clear what you're asking me. You're asking me if Torah is the level of Malchus? What are you asking?
Not asking about specifics, but what you're saying now is specific, and I have to like wrap my head around each one and understand and imagine. But right now, in general, I'm asking the next, the Malchus that we're referring to always is actually the Malchus of the next one. Just like
What
the
do you mean by
Malchus
the
of
next one? What do you mean by the next one of next to what?
whatever comes next. Let's say Chochma, the next one is Bina. Bina, the next one is Das.
What he
Das,
said here is that Mishnah, Shisha Sidre Mishnah, the 6 orders of Mishnah are the 6 midas of Chesed through Yesod. That's what he said here. That's the midas within Chochma.
And then the Talmud receives, and so the Talmud is the Malchus,
but he doesn't say, it doesn't say that here. The Talmud is, the Talmud is either Nihi of Atzilus or Bria.
In relation to the Mishnah, the Talmud is Malchus.
I don't know. He didn't say that anywhere. Here, to me, sounds all Torah is Malchus. Malchus receiving from different levels.
Well, yes, simultaneously there are different things going on. But if you look at it specifically,
my understanding here is that Chochmei law is Mikra. Chochmei Tata, which is in Malchus, is Mishnah actually.
Right, because Mishnah is Malchus of Mikra.
Okay, I'm not. What should I tell you? I haven't seen anywhere here a reference that Talmud is Mishnah. Is Talmud is Malchus.
Malchus Peh Torah Sheba'al Peh.
Mishnah is also Torah Sheba'al Peh.
Well,
okay.
Just the idea that the Malchus that we're referring to when we're looking at the 10 is
listen,
the Malchus
to me,
of the next.
I think we should take this offline because getting very technical. I'm not sure what he doesn't say anywhere
it's not technical at all. It's like the Malchus, the receiver of.
Anyway, I find this technical. So I think we should, this is not something we can discuss afterwards. We don't have to belabor it. Do you find here somewhere that he says that Talmud is
No, I thought I
Malchus
understood it from what you were saying, but when you were talking it clicked for me.
Okay, what should I say? I don't see that expression anywhere. The levels are, he explained, is either Chabad Chagas Nihi, that is Mikra, Mishnah, Talmud, or in the worlds, it's Asiya, Yitzira, and Bria. That he says very explicitly. Now he's been talking about how Mishnah draws from the midas of Chochma into, as he said on top of page 1378, midas of Chochma into Chochma Tata. And based on that, Talmud is like Bria. It's not Atzilus. Talmud is already bringing Torah into a world of Choshech. Choshech, Bara Choshech. That's how I read here. Anyway, this is not over yet. It's going to be discussed more at length. He's going to talk about Bina Yesera, Nitna Be'isha. So maybe he'll say more about this. That will be What may need clarification is Teisha Bapeh Bina, or Talmud is like Bina compared to Chochma, or is it Malchus? Because he did compare both as far as giving birth. So first he spoke about it in the context of Bina. I'm not sure about how that plays itself out.
Maybe there's a higher level and a lower level, internal and an external.
Maybe. On bottom of page 1384, he's going to talk about that more. So maybe that needs to be elaborated on. But that I have to look into a little more in depth to see. First he spoke about Chochm Bina, then he talks about it as far as Malchus goes.
It's like Hashem's name. It's the same thing with the hey and the hey,
Yeah,
right?
but the thing is that the whole point he keeps saying that it's all the level of Malchus of Atzilus. Everything goes through Malchus. Okay, let me stop here.